The sound of rotors carved through the desert night, heavy, rhythmic, alive. Inside the CH-47 Chinook, 12 Rangers sat shoulder to shoulder, their faces dimly lit by the red cabin light. Dust and static filled the air. Every man in that bird had seen combat, but tonight, even the veterans stayed quiet. Sergeant Elena Cruz checked her weapon for the third time. Her gloved fingers worked with surgical precision. Safety off, chamber clear, scope aligned. A small ritual that steadied her heartbeat. Across from her, Sergeant Holt smirked. "Still nervous, Cruz?" She looked up, her brown eyes unreadable. "Nervous keeps you alive." The laughter that followed was short-lived. The pilot's voice crackled over comms. 5 minutes to LZ Nightglass. Hold tight. They were flying low, too low. The terrain below was a jagged sprawl of canyons and rock, the kind of place even drones avoided. Their mission: extract a captured CIA operative before sunrise. No backup. No second chance. Elena scanned the horizon through the open ramp. The desert stretched endlessly, black and silent under the moonlight. Something felt wrong. She could taste it in the air. That metallic stillness before all hell breaks loose. Then it happened. A flash tore across the night sky. A missile. Evasive. "Evasive!" the pilot screamed. The Chinook lurched violently as the missile exploded nearby, sending shrapnel through the fuselage. The cabin filled with smoke and sparks. Alarms blared. Men shouted over the roar. Elena slammed against the sidewall, her headset snapping loose. She tried to reach the ramp lever, but a second blast hit them from below. The entire rear section buckled, and then the world fell away. The ramp tore open. Gear and men were sucked into the void. Elena felt the violent pull. Her harness snapped, and suddenly, she was airborne. The night swallowed her whole, her body twisted in free fall, the wind screaming in her ears. The ground was a blur of darkness and streaks of flame from burning wreckage. For a split second, she saw the helicopter spiraling, a dying machine cutting through the sky. And then it was gone. She tried to stabilize, but there was no parachute, no backup chute, nothing. Just her. 30 seconds to impact. She thought of her mother. The woman who'd taught her how to fire a rifle at 12. How to survive with nothing but a blade and a map. Her voice echoed in her head. "A Ranger doesn't fall, Cruz. She lands." Elena adjusted her body, spread her arms, and aimed for the dunes below. She hit hard, rolling, tumbling. Pain exploded through her ribs, her leg, her shoulder. The world went black. When she came to, there was only silence, smoke on the horizon, stars above, and the bitter taste of blood in her mouth. Her comms were dead, her weapon gone. Her body screamed in pain. But when she saw the burning remains of the Chinook miles away, one thought cut through everything else. Her team was out there. Maybe alive, maybe not. She dragged herself upright, limping toward the faint orange glow. Every step left a print of blood in the sand. Behind her, distant engines rumbled, enemy convoys drawn to the crash. Ahead, the desert stretched infinite. She tightened her grip on the broken strap across her chest, whispered under her breath, "You threw the wrong Ranger." And then she disappeared into the darkness. The sun came up cruelly, burning away the night and any mercy the desert might have offered. When Elena opened her eyes, the horizon shimmered like molten glass. Her lips were cracked, her throat raw. The pain in her ribs told her at least 3 were broken, maybe more. But she was still breathing. The smoke from the crash site rose like a black pillar in the distance. That's where she needed to go. Her team had been inside that bird. 12 Rangers, trained, tough, loyal, family. She forced herself to stand. The world tilted, her vision dimmed, but she steadied herself with a long exhale. Every survival instinct kicked in. Assess, move, hydrate, signal later. Her training had been brutal for a reason. Rangers didn't wait for rescue. Rangers became the rescue. She tore a strip from her uniform and wrapped her leg where shrapnel had torn through the thigh. The sand was already dark with dried blood. Then, using her broken rifle barrel as a makeshift crutch, she began walking. Each step was a war. Every dune was a mountain, but quitting wasn't an option. She'd buried too many brothers to let herself be one more name on the memorial wall. As she moved, flashes of memory came back. The explosion, the screams, Holt trying to grab her arm before the ramp tore away. The guilt hit her harder than the crash. If any of them were alive, they'd be pinned, wounded, surrounded. The radio on her shoulder crackled, faint static, then a voice. "Mayday, night glass down." Repeat, "Night glass down." It was Holt, weak, distorted, but alive. Her pulse surged. She turned toward the voice, adjusting her heading, using the sun's position to mark direction. The terrain grew rough. jagged stone replacing soft sand. Scorch marks littered the area. Fragments of the Chinook's shell, twisted and smoking. Then she found the first body. Private Keener. No pulse. His dog tags clung to his burned vest. She whispered his name, pulled the tags free, and kept moving. A few yards later, a faint cough broke the silence. She dropped low, crawled over a ridge, and saw him, Sergeant Holt, pinned under wreckage, his arm crushed, blood pooling beneath him. "Elena?" he rasped. His eyes widened. You fell. "Didn't land pretty," she said, kneeling beside him. "But I'm here." He laughed, a painful, broken sound. "Thought you were dead. Guess I didn't get the memo." She worked fast, using a steel fragment as leverage to pry the debris off. Holt screamed but stayed conscious. Once free, she bandaged his arm, gave him a sip from her canteen, and scanned the horizon. Enemy trucks. Maybe 2 clicks away. They didn't have long. "Listen," she said, tightening his tourniquet. "You can walk? Barely. Then crawl." He looked at her, confused. "What about the others?" She met his eyes, steady, unflinching. "We're getting them all." They moved together, limping, bleeding, driven. The wind picked up, kicking sand into their faces, masking their tracks. Elena stopped only once, pulling Holt behind a dune as the rumble of enemy engines drew closer. Through the binoculars she'd salvaged, she saw them. 5 technical trucks, bristling with weapons. The enemy was already combing the crash site. If they found the survivors, it was over. She turned to Holt. "You still got that signal flare?" He nodded weakly, pulling it from his belt. "Don't use it," she said. "Not yet," he frowned. "Then what are we waiting for?" Her eyes narrowed as she looked toward the canyon ahead. For them to make a mistake. Then she adjusted the rifle sling on her shoulder, cracked stock, bent sight, and whispered the words every ranger lived by. "Rangers lead the way." And with that, she started crawling toward the sound of enemy gunfire. The wind howled through the narrow canyon like a living thing, carrying the faint metallic echo of engines and shouts. Elena crouched low behind a ridge of rock, eyes locked on the convoy moving through the valley below. 5 trucks, 10, maybe 12 armed fighters. They were sweeping the wreckage, searching for bodies, weapons, survivors. Behind her, Sergeant Holt struggled to keep up, his face pale from blood loss. "You're not really gonna fight them," he whispered. Elena didn't answer. She was already studying the terrain, the way the canyon narrowed ahead, how the slope funneled everything into a single point. A natural chokehold, and a trap waiting to happen. "We can't outrun them," she said finally, "so we make them stop running." Holt blinked, realizing what she meant. "You're going to ambush them? With what?" "You've got a busted rifle and no explosives." She gave a faint grin. "Then I'll make some." She moved quickly, stripping parts from the wreckage. Fuel lines, torn straps, flare casings. Every ranger knew how to improvise under pressure, but what she built looked like madness. A crude line of fuel-soaked cloth tied to a cracked metal plate, positioned near the canyon's narrowest bend. Holt shook his head. "You're insane." "Maybe," she said, lighting the flare. "But that's what it takes." The trucks were closing in now, engines growling, dust rising behind them. Elena waited, heartbeat steady, mind razor-sharp. She counted. 3 trucks passed the choke point. 4. When the 5th rolled over the plate, she fired. The canyon erupted. A wall of flame roared upward, trapping the convoy in a tunnel of fire and smoke. Men screamed, vehicles swerved, and in the chaos, Elena moved. Fast, deliberate, deadly. She fired controlled bursts, picking off exposed gunners before they could orient. The echo of her rifle bounced through the canyon, making it sound like multiple shooters. Holt, bleeding but determined, grabbed a sidearm and joined in. One by one, the enemy positions fell. It wasn't clean. It wasn't elegant. It was survival. And it was working. When the last truck exploded, the shockwave threw her backward. She hit the ground hard, dust filling her lungs. For a moment, all she heard was ringing. Then silence. Holt crawled over, gasping. "That was insane." Elena smirked through the pain. "Told you." But there was no time to celebrate. Through the smoke, she spotted movement. A flare rising from a ridge about a kilometer away. Not enemy. Ranger issue. Survivors. Her heart kicked. She grabbed Holt's shoulder. "They're alive." He looked toward the faint orange light. "That's Sergeant Vale's code. He was in the rear section." "Then let's go bring them home." They pushed forward, using the canyon's shade to hide from aerial drones now circling above. Elena moved like a ghost, her instincts guiding her through the maze of rock and dust. Half an hour later, they reached a hollow where 3 figures huddled behind debris, burned, battered, but alive. Cruz? Vale's voice cracked when he saw her. You fell out of the damn bird! Yeah, she said, grinning faintly. Didn't stick the landing. The reunion was brief. The enemy would regroup soon. They scavenged weapons, patched wounds, and shared a canteen that barely had a mouthful left. Elena laid out the plan in the sand with a piece of wire. We moved through the ravine, hit the extraction ridge by dawn. If we're lucky, we'll find a signal window for evac. Vale stared at her map, then at her. You're running this up now, Cruz? She met his eyes. I was the one they threw away. Guess that makes me expendable enough to lead. Vale gave a grim smile. Lead on, Sergeant, as the group faded into the canyon's shadows, smoke still curling from the wreckage behind them. Elena glanced back once at the flames, at the chaos, at the wreck of her old life, and whispered to herself, You should have finished the job. Then she turned and disappeared into the rising heat of dawn. Night fell like a curtain. Sudden, absolute, and cold. The heat of the day bled away, replaced by a chill that bit through torn uniforms and burned skin. The desert was silent now, except for the crunch of boots against gravel and the labored breaths of the wounded rangers. Elena led from the front, her shadow long in the starlight. Every few minutes she'd stop, scan the horizon, and adjust their path by the stars. Polaris, Orion's belt, faint but steady guides. Her compass had shattered in the crash, but her training hadn't. Behind her, Holt limped on, his arm bound tight with torn webbing. Vale supported him from one side, carrying a salvaged rifle. The 2 other survivors, Keegan and Dorsey, barely spoke, saving every breath for movement. They were 5 now, 5 rangers out of 12. Every few miles, Elena stopped to listen. Crouched, still as stone, fingers pressed to the ground. Twice she caught the faint tremor of distant engines, drones, search teams. The enemy was still hunting. Think they'll find us? Holt whispered. Elena didn't look back. Only if we stop moving. The terrain shifted from soft dunes to broken slate, jagged ridges casting long black shadows. Her legs screamed in pain with every step, but she refused to slow down. Pain meant alive. Pain meant forward. At one point, Vale stumbled, cursing. Elena turned back, crouched, and checked his ankle. Swollen, likely sprained. You're no good to us if you fall, she said, tightening his bandage. He gritted his teeth. You sound like a captain. She glanced up, smirking faintly. Last I checked, I was still a sergeant. But out here, ranks don't matter. Survival does. They pressed on. By midnight, the wind had picked up, a low, moaning howl that carried sand like knives. Visibility dropped to near zero. The rangers covered their faces and followed Elena's voice through the storm. She guided them by instinct, not where the wind was strongest, but where it bent. That meant cliffs, shelter, maybe water. They stumbled into a narrow ravine just as the sandstorm hit full force. The walls shielded them from the worst of it. For the first time in hours, they stopped. Vale collapsed against the rock, coughing. We can't keep this up. We need extraction. Signal windows at 0500, Elena said. That's when satellite sweep hits this sector. If we can get high ground by then, we'll have a shot. And if we can't? Holt asked. She met his eyes, calm, firm, unflinching. Then we fight. Silence settled over them. Each man looked at her differently now. Not as the rookie, not as the woman they once doubted, but as something harder, forged in fire and grit. When the wind eased, Elena climbed a rock ledge and scanned the distance through her rifle scope. The horizon was faintly glowing. Enemy campfires, miles away. She could see trucks, silhouettes moving. They're circling the crash site, she murmured. They'll sweep east at dawn, right toward us, Vale said. Exactly. She climbed down, her voice low but steady. We'll use that. Set a decoy trail, drag marks, boot prints heading south. Then we cut northwest, through the ridge. Holt frowned. That ridge is nothing but drop-offs. Only if you don't know the path, she said. My mother trained here, special recon. She called it Ghost Valley. Said no one who chased her through it ever came out? Holt blinked. You're serious? Elena's expression hardened. I'm alive because of her. You want to stay that way too? The others nodded. No hesitation now. And as they packed up and moved once more into the darkness, the wind carried their scent away, masking them, hiding them, protecting them. Behind them, the fires of the enemy flickered on the horizon. Ahead lay a maze of cliffs and shadows where even light was afraid to go. Elena whispered, almost to herself, "Come find me." And the rangers followed her into the mouth of the valley, ghosts in the desert. Led by the one they'd once called a liability, the valley earned its name. By dawn, the desert was silent again. Too silent. The wind didn't whistle here. It whispered, sliding across stone like breath. The walls of the ravine rose in jagged shapes that cast long, reaching shadows. Even the sun looked weaker, its light fractured by the maze of cliffs. Elena led the team in a staggered formation, keeping low. Her every movement was deliberate, quiet steps, gloved hand brushing against the wall for bearings. This place wasn't on any map. She knew it because she'd been here before, not as a ranger, but as a child. Her mother had brought her once, years ago, during a survival exercise that had felt more like a lesson in ghosts than in war. Now, she understood why. "Stay tight," she whispered. "Sound carries weird in here. One shout could bounce for a mile." Holt grunted in acknowledgement, shouldering a scavenged AK. Vale limped beside him, Dorsey scanning rear. They all moved with the unspoken rhythm of men who'd accepted death but refused to invite it. Half an hour in, Holt stopped. "Movement," he whispered, pointing to a cliff edge. Elena froze, squinting through the glare. Dust rose. Faint tire tracks. The enemy had followed. They weren't far behind. "Positions," she ordered. The team scattered, Holt and Vale taking the left ridge, Dorsey covering the rear, Elena setting up high ground with her cracked rifle and a salvaged scope. The valley narrowed ahead, a perfect kill box. She didn't plan to run anymore. The first enemy scout appeared moments later, creeping through the pass, weapon raised. He paused, scanning the ground. Elena didn't breathe. The scout turned to signal, one shot. The bullet cracked the silence and dropped him instantly. The echo bounced off the canyon walls, splitting into phantom gunfire that made it sound like 10 rifles instead of one. The convoy halted. Enemy shouts filled the valley. Engines revved, doors slammed. Soldiers poured out, fanning across the rocks, confused by the sound's direction. Elena smirked. "Welcome to Ghost Valley." She shifted position, firing again from a new angle. Each shot ricocheted between cliffs, creating the illusion of a full ranger squad. The enemy panicked, firing wildly into shadows, wasting ammunition. Vale caught on quickly, firing short bursts from his perch to add to the illusion. Holt and Dorsey echoed her shots from different ranges. Within minutes, chaos consumed the canyon. Explosions erupted as Elena triggered her improvised traps. Grenades rigged with motion sensors, tied to strips of metal she'd buried hours before. One by one, trucks ignited, filling the valley with smoke and screams. Through the haze, she saw an officer shouting into a radio, probably calling for air support. She lined up the scope, exhaled slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The shot hit clean. The radio fell silent. Then, for the first time, she heard it. A voice, faint but distinct, crackling over enemy comms. "It's her. It's Reaper. The one from Kandahar." Elena froze. That name. Her mother's call sign. Holt looked up at her. "What did he say?" She didn't answer. The revelation hit her like a blast wave. The enemy wasn't chasing random survivors. They knew this valley, and who trained her. Her pulse spiked. "Pack up," she ordered. "We're moving! Why?" "We've got them pinned," Holt protested. "They're not afraid of us," she said. "They're afraid of what's coming." And she was right. The sky trembled with the distant growl of engines, low, heavy, coordinated. A drone sweep, followed by gunships. "Extraction windows gone," Vale muttered. Elena checked her watch. "Then we make a new one." She turned toward the cliffs, spotting a faint trail. One she remembered her mother showing her years ago. It climbed the ridge to an ancient signal tower, half buried, still operational if the solar grid worked. That was their way out, if they could reach it before the storm closed in. "Move," she shouted, grabbing Holt by the vest. Ghost Valley isn't done with them yet. And as they disappeared into the labyrinth, smoke trailing behind them like ghosts of their own making, the enemy's radios crackled again, the same fearful words repeated in broken voices. "Reaper. She's her daughter. The Reaper's back." By the time they reached the ridge, the sky had turned the color of smoke and blood. The rising sun was swallowed by dust, kicked up by the advancing enemy columns below. The air hummed with the metallic buzz of drones and the low thunder of approaching gunships. Elena's lungs burned. Her uniform was torn, caked with dirt and blood. But she didn't slow. The others followed her up the narrow cliff trail, every step an act of defiance against death itself. At the top, the old signal tower came into view, a rusted skeleton of steel half buried in rock. Panels cracked, cables dangling like vines. Vale collapsed beside it, gasping. "Tell me this thing still works." Elena knelt by the console, brushing away sand. The solar grid indicator flickered. Dead, then alive. Barely. She ripped open a field kit, splicing wires with a combat knife. Sparks flew. Holt watched her, shaking his head. Where'd you learn all that? My mother built recon traps in war zones, she said, tightening the last wire. She taught me how to make tech scream when it's dying. The panel hummed to life. The satellite link was faint, unstable, but enough. She grabbed the radio, tuning to the emergency ranger frequency. This is Sergeant Elena Cruz, Night Glass Team. We have survivors requesting immediate evac. Coordinates transmitting now. Hostiles inbound, heavy armor and drones. Static. Then, copy Night Glass. Evac window 8 at 20 minutes. Hold position, 20 minutes. She looked down into the valley. The enemy convoy was already crawling toward them. Trucks, armored jeeps, foot soldiers. Dozens of them. They'd followed the smoke and the gunfire straight to her. Vale's voice was quiet. We can't hold that long, Elena's eyes hardened. We don't need to. We just need to make them think we can. She turned toward the slope, scanning the terrain. The narrow paths, the ledges, the unstable shale. Then she smiled, that rare, fierce grin her mother used to wear before a storm. We're going to bury them. She split the team. Holt and Dorsey set tripwires along the lower pass, using scavenged grenades and canisters. Vale took a sniper position above the ridge. Elena herself stayed by the tower, aligning its antenna toward the valley. When the first wave of enemies entered the canyon, she triggered the tower's emergency beacon. The signal emitted a piercing shriek, bouncing off every wall, disorienting the troops, scrambling their drones. Then came the explosions. The tripwires lit the valley in a chain of fire. Rocks shattered, vehicles flipped. Smoke filled the air, and through it, Elena moved. Fast, precise, unstoppable. She fired only when she had to, conserving ammo, every shot a statement. The enemy tried to flank, but the cliffs betrayed them. Gravity became her ally. Holt shouted over comms, "They're breaking formation!" "Good," she said. "Let them run." From above, Vale's rifle cracked again and again. "Cruz, we've got movement. The lead truck's pulling back." "That's not retreat," Elena replied, narrowing her eyes. "That's regroup." And then she saw it. A black flag rising from the rear vehicle. Not a scout unit. Not local militia. It was the elite strike force her mother had once destroyed in Kandahar. Recognition hit both sides at the same time. The enemy commander stepped from the vehicle, raised his radio, and barked in accented English. "Reaper's daughter, surrender, and we end this clean." Elena stared down at him, her expression unreadable. Then she keyed her radio and spoke loud enough for every channel to hear. "You already ended this when you threw me from that bird." She fired one round into the signal tower base, and the entire ridge began to collapse. The explosion ripped through Ghost Valley, swallowing trucks, men, and echoes of a war that refused to die. The cliff gave way, burying the enemy under tons of stone and dust. The Rangers held their ground, clinging to the upper ledge as the shockwave passed. When the dust settled, the valley was silent again. Then, faintly, the sound of rotors. Evac. As the helicopter descended, Elena stood tall, watching the sun rise through the haze. Holt limped up beside her, shaking his head. "You really are your mother's daughter," he said. Elena smirked. "No, I'm the one they tried to throw away." When the pilot leaned out and shouted, "Who the hell set off that canyon blast?" Holt just pointed at her. "Her name's Cruz, but the enemy called her Reaper Zero." And as the helicopter lifted off, leaving behind the shattered valley and the ghosts of those who doubted her, the radio crackled one last time, enemy chatter fading into fear. "Reaper lives." 2 weeks later, the airbase was quiet. No gunfire, no engines, just the slow hum of wind sliding across the desert runway. Elena Cruz stood at attention in front of the flag-draped memorial wall. Rows of names glimmered in the sunlight. Heroes who'd never made it back. Her uniform was freshly pressed, but her boots were still dusty. She hadn't cleaned them on purpose. Some dirt, she believed, was meant to stay. Behind her, footsteps approached. Measured, heavy, deliberate. Admiral Rains, commander of the Joint Special Operations Command, stopped beside her. His voice was low but carried the weight of history. "You disobeyed direct orders." "Sergeant." "Yes, sir." "You detonated a federal relay tower." "Yes, sir." "And you saved 15 SEALs." "4 Rangers and the Canyon Patrol." "Yes, sir." Silence stretched. Then Rains took something from his pocket. A small metal insignia, worn with time. A call sign plate. He held it out to her. "This belonged to your mother. We retired it after her last mission." Elena's breath caught. The words engraved on it were simple, precise. Reaper Zero. "But Command decided," Rains continued, "some legends don't stay buried. From today, it's yours. Officially." He pinned the insignia to her vest. The moment it touched fabric, a weight settled in her chest, not of burden, but of belonging. Nearby, the SEALs she'd saved stood watching. None spoke, but as Rains stepped back and saluted, they followed suit, one by one, until the entire hangar was filled with silent respect. Then, from the far corner, someone whispered over the intercom, "Signal just came through, sir. Encrypted channel. Call sign Reaper 0 requesting clearance." The Admiral looked toward Elena, half smiling. "Guess it's already official." Elena turned toward the open runway, wind tugging at her hair. The sun was climbing, painting the world gold again. Somewhere beyond that horizon, new orders waited. She touched the insignia once, her mother's legacy, now her own. "Reaper 0, she murmured. "On mission." The engines of an A-10 roared to life behind her. Moments later, the jet lifted from the runway, slicing into the dawn, and the legend of Reaper 0 was reborn, carried not by ghosts, but by the daughter who refused to die.